Good morning. I welcome you all to the webinar, which we're organizing before the workshop, which is going to deal with how to manage an FMD crisis, which will happen next week. So I welcome you all. My name is Mark Kovari. I work as a contingency planning officer at the FMD, and thank you very much that you're able to join us for this webinar. In order to give an outline of the agenda of today, I will introduce to you the trainers of the workshop, give a bit of introduction of foot and mouth disease, talk about a bit of emergency preparedness and management, talk about crisis communication, have a question and answer session with the trainers before the workshop, and I'm going to give you more detail on the practical arrangements. Of course, we will record this webinar, so also those participants who are not able to join us now will be able to watch it. On the webinar screen, on the bottom right, you see a little chat box. Feel free to type in any questions that you might have as the presentations go on, because at the question and answer session, I'm going to read those out loud, and then the trainer is going to answer it. So to start, just a quick interaction. We would like to ask you where you're joining us today. So I'm joining you from Rome, Italy. And can you please share where you're joining us from? Okay, I see Riga, Vilnius, Lithuania, Rome, Italy. Okay. Don't be shy. I see also Stephanie joined us, and also Martina. Welcome you both. Okay. So thank you for this quick introduction. The main purpose of this is to see if you're able to type and if you're able to interact with the Adobe Connect. To interact and to present the trainers, so there will be 4 trainers for the workshop. Ruth, she will be joining, she's working with us as a STP, a short-term placement under component 1.1. Also Marius, he will join us as an EFMD expert and also share his insights about crisis management. So will also Ruth. Courtney, his specialist field is risk communication, and he will be leading those topics during the workshop. And I will also join this workshop and mostly focus on the emergency preparedness related topics. You will get to meet all of the trainers in person and also as we go on with the various presentations. A quick introduction to EFMD. So we are one of the oldest commissions established by FAO, so the Food and Agriculture Organization. We have 38 member states, and actually +1, because right now Montenegro is also joining as a member state. We welcome them. And our governing body is the executive committee, which is a group of elected chief veterinary officers for 2 years, and they oversee the deliveries and the projects of EFMD. Our work currently is divided between 3 pillars. Pillar 1, which is focusing on improving readiness for FMD. Pillar 2, which is focusing on reducing the FMD risk in the European neighborhood. And Pillar 3, which is focusing on the global strategy for foot and mouth disease. My involvement is for Pillar 1, and under Pillar 1, mostly component 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and several others. But to give another version of EFMD, or to give another taste of it, so what we do? We provide training, obviously, on foot and mouth disease, face-to-face, like the real tribe training courses we do in Kenya, but also in Nepal. We organize various workshops on FMD-related topics, like the one which we're going to organize next week in Kaunas. We have online courses, and the most renowned one is the FMD Emergency Preparedness course, and various in-depth courses for various regions. We circulate information on foot and mouth disease. We support various networks on various topics. We help to build laboratory capacity, and we try to enhance and increase regional collaboration in various European or non-European regions. So as mentioned, component 1.1, this is a dedicated component for training only for the member states. Every member state has 10 training credits, and through the national training focal points, you can allocate those training credits for a time span of 2 years on various training. So now, moving on to the more technical content of the webinar, we would like to just give you a bit of a taste on the topics we're gonna cover during the workshop. And the first one is on emergency preparedness. But this is really just a teaser right now. So in order to, we will come back to these topics also during the workshop, but I think it's very, very important to kind of speak the same language, to use the same nomenclature. Of course, everything what I've written here, you are welcome to argue with during the workshop. So preparedness. So what is preparedness? It is certainly a state of readiness to prepare for an event. So basically, we're getting ready for something. This might be very self-explanatory if you're an English speaker, but my main aim is to go through these English terms, also for those who don't use English as their first language. So preparedness planning, so we have added the planning component to preparedness, is that we prepare for this extraordinary incident. Incident is a term used many times by crisis management. So basically an incident would be an outbreak of foot and mouth disease. And preparedness planning is to prepare for this extraordinary incident or event, which cannot manage by ordinary resources and routine alone. So then the question comes, then we have discussed what is preparedness and preparedness planning, but then what is emergency preparedness? So basically it is the development of all necessary infrastructure in order to have a rapid response on early detection in case of an abnormal disease emergency. Within this prior development of infrastructure, we mean a range of various actions, from legislation to veterinary service to being able to diagnose it, to have a good collaboration with various stakeholders. And putting it together, an emergency preparedness plan is a high-level document which lists and includes all the activities that are required in order to prepare for the emergency. And also, if there are several emergencies, like several transboundary animal diseases, several threats, how to prioritize between them. So basically, an emergency preparedness plan is basically a plan which describes what needs to be done in order to get prepared. And the preparedness program is which makes the emergency preparedness plan happen, so it will translate the plan into various actions like trainings, equipping people, and simulation exercises. And I would like to use this opportunity and ask those participants who have joined us for this webinar that in your country, do you have an emergency preparedness plan or an emergency preparedness program, either for foot-and-mouth disease or for transboundary animal diseases? But the options are yes, no, and of course you might not be certain about it. I think we have 5 participants, so I would expect 5 answers. But I see that overwhelmingly there is a preparedness plan. So contingency plans, which we're going to talk about a bit later, are part of that preparedness, and certainly they're a key element, but contingency plans don't necessarily equal preparedness. Okay, thank you very much. So that will be very good, because I would be very keen on seeing your input on your emergency preparedness plans in your countries. So contingency. So now we're moving away from preparedness to another term which is used very frequently, contingency. So contingency, an unusual and unpredictable event which might or might not occur. And here comes in a very, very commonly used term, the contingency plan. In some cases, it might be also used the term crisis management plan. We had some discussions on this, and I would be also interested in your feedback. It might not necessarily equal a contingency plan. It might be a document which is above it, but depends very much on the structure and on the background of the various countries. But nevertheless, the contingency plan is aimed to be a very practical tool which can be used in case of an outbreak of foot-and-mouth disease, and it is an element as part of the overall preparedness. There are multiple approaches for a contingency plan, also in Europe, also in the world. I had the chance to review many of them. Of course, being the FMD, we're going to focus on the European aspects. But I think these workshops are very good to have the possibility to expand our boundaries on what we really would like to see in contingency plans. And one more concept, you might have heard of various cycles, emergency management cycle, but there is also an emergency preparedness cycle. And as you see, there are 4 elements in it. There is a planning, there is equipping, there is training, and there is exercises. And one methodology is to link these various parts together in order to get efficient preparedness. Of course, the big discussion is what is the level of preparedness that you want to achieve, how much resources you have in order to get to reach that certain level of preparedness, and in order to do it in a harmonized and a structured manner, you have the plans, contingency plans, you need the various equipments to do them, you need to facilitate the training so people develop their competent skills, and then you test the plans and the capabilities of those people through exercises, simulation exercises. So we're going to talk about this more. The focus of the workshop will be more on the response part and the communication part, but we will touch upon the preparedness part and its interaction with the other components. So now I would like to, if you have questions to this, please feel free to type it into the chat box, or we will be very happy to discuss with you during the workshop. And now I invite my fellow trainer.
Good day to everyone, and I welcome you, all of you, to the training. So, of course, I would be very happy to welcome you here in Lithuania next week, and I hope that we all together would manage the training, would have the fruitful discussion, and would be able to answer to all of your questions raised. So I have the part on emergency management, and I would start with a very hard to answer and very hard to explainable question: what is an emergency management? But as Albert Einstein said, if you can't explain it simply, so you don't understand it well enough. So I will try, not only during this webinar, but also during the upcoming course, together with you, to clarify what is an emergency management, how to deal with it. So what is an animal health emergency? Because we know that the occurrence of an animal diseases that cannot be effectively handled on a spot or on a local level, it is an animal health emergency. Also, it can only be resolved by a national response, or it may require international response if it involves a number of countries in a region. And of course, when we're dealing with the animal health emergency, we need immediate actions to be taken in order to couple with the emergency. And when we talk about the emergency management, what is the emergency management? So this is an organization and management of resources and of course responsibilities for dealing with all humanitarian aspects of emergencies or crisis, including preparedness, response to the emergency, and recovery. So we should also recover from the emergency, not only to deal with it. And the aim of the emergency management is to reduce the harmful effects of all hazards, including disasters. Also, this is related to the animal disease outbreaks. So, and the emergency management should not be adequate to disaster management. What are the main phases of the emergency or crisis management activities? So when we are talking about emergency management, we should firstly deal with the preparedness. That's the activities which is aimed at avoiding or intervening to stop an emergency from its occurring. The next stage is the mitigation stage. So we should eliminate or mitigate the impact of the emergency or the crisis. But if we are dealing already with the crisis, with the emergency, we should respond. We should activate our plan, our emergency response plan, our contingency plan, and address the immediate effects of the emergency. And of course, when we timely respond, when the emergency is over, so we should recover. So the actions should be taken to restore the normal operations and to address any follow-up actions to close to the previous activity. And when we are talking about the contingency planning and the contingency plan, so there are three main phases on contingency planning. So watching over or preparedness, and then the actions or steps when we deal with the suspected case, or we have already confirmed outbreak of animal contagious disease. So at the preparedness stage or watching over stage, we should to set up and regularly update our contingency plan. We should train and we should prepare the actors which would be further deal with the emergency, the suspicion, or with the confirmed case. So we should maintain the alert of the network. So we should maintain the alert of our vets, which would be involved in the field activities. Also, the lab should be alerted. And the regular check of the available resources should be also done at this stage. When we have the suspicion, we should mobilize the actors, which belongs to our contingency plan. We should start the sampling procedures, so actually we should start to respond. And we should provide the epidemiological survey. But when the disease is confirmed, so the very clear actions should be taken. And the procedures should be in place on how to control the movement of animals, products, or people, how to establish the protection and surveillance zone, how to mobilize the expert groups, and of course the procedures which would be under the responsibility of the local disease control center on the culling, carcass destruction, on the decontamination of the infected premises, and how to make the vaccination. So if we look into the emergency management or contingency plans, so Marcus explained already the terms, so they are more or less equal. The contingency plan should be very easily to understand and simply to adapt. It should be a very practical tool, so it should not be a piece of paper. It should be functional and flexible, action-oriented, and consider various views. It should, of course, it should be written, easy to accessible, but to keep up to date, comprehensible, realistic, adhere to existing standards, requirements, national legislation, international standards, and of course, time to time tested. So when we are talking about the emergency management, it is consists from 5 core tasks. And during our next week workshop, we will try to clarify every task and to try to go to the more deep analysis. But now it's only introduction. 5 core tasks for emergency management consist from the activation and operation of the National Disease Control Center. Of course, then the following action would be to activate and operate local disease control center, then management of information about emergency, coordination of actions and resources, emergency or crisis communication on how to communicate when we have the problem, and operational response. So when we will touch the part on the activation and management, it is very crucial to know how warnings and alarms should be received and forwarded in the situation that may justify of the activation of the national or local disease control centers. So we will try to discuss among ourselves and then to reach the common agreement or based on your country practices, who decides if the national or local disease control center should be activated, and who carries out the activation in praxis. So who is the right decision maker? Then how does any procedure exist? How permanent members and employees in support functions should be summoned? Is it easy? Because we know that in the majority of the cases, the emergency occurs Friday late in the evening. So how to activate and how to manage this? So how to confirm that all the members belonging to the national or local disease control center have received the information and they will show up, because you need to discuss, you need to present. So which information should be evident from the activation call? Who decides on the time and place for the first meeting, on the number of participants, agenda, are the right people present, and who will distribute the initial data about the suspicion or the confirmed outbreak. So that's also very important, and it's the challenge for the country and for the competent authority. If you have already the emergency, how to manage the information, how to monitor all the information which is received, by which tools to use the phone, fax, email, or maybe you have a secured communication system. So is it important or not to register the communication? Of course that yes, because all important written and oral communication should be registered in case you after would like to see what has been decided, or even if you have been inspected by the numbers of inspection, they can also request your communicational notice. So when we have the emergency, we should to have the very clear picture to combine the situation about the suspicion of outbreak, which information should flow to the media. We should assess also the risk, take the actions, and timely to provide the communication. That's the only few examples from praxis, how it is done when you should to act and you should start to use the resources. Do we have enough resource? Can we deal with the small scale or large scale outbreaks with the resources available? Do we have enough power to start to act? So who again would decide on the actions? how the group would be mobilized. Everything we will try to cover and to discuss next week. So it's only the ideas in order to start to think and to start to think about how you will deal with the emergency. And of course, when the emergency is secured, you should respond. And you should have very clear tasks. So which primary or secondary task must be tackled as a part of the response. Then we should start to think how to respond and how to manage the response, because who would be in charge of the operational response and with which mandate? So the CBO would decide, the prime minister, or the president, organization. When we talk about the organization which would be involved to respond to the emergency, so which units should be involved in the operational response? And how might the existing organization be adapted in order to perform a satisfactory response? So not all the countries are big enough, and not all of us have enough personnel and equipment. So how much personnel and equipment is needed for the operational response? So we should think this in advance. We should put it into the emergency plan or contingency plan, and we should decide where and when should it be deployed and who should do what. And of course, the procedures on how should the task be carried out concretely and how should they be coordinated with with other organizations' operational responses. Who take the responsibility of that? National Disease Control Center, local disease control center, how they would communicate, so how they should communicate. And when we deal with the emergency, of course, we have different tools to which would lead us to the success: trainings, exercises, improvement of our contingency plan, of course, to the organization itself, the equipment which is available in every organization, and the well-structured and up-to-date contingency plan. So using all these tools, we can successfully manage the emergency. But how to do that, which problems can erased, we will open this secret next week. So thank you very much. That was my last slide. If you have any questions, I will try to answer them now, or it's up to Mark how he will organize it.
Thank you very much, Marius. So if you have questions, please feel free to type them into the chat box. We will have a dedicated session where we can discuss your various questions and answers, but also we will have the workshop. So if the questions pop up to you later, we will be there to discuss there next week. And Marius, thank you very much for highlighting on how much the preparedness is interwoven, is connected to the success of the response. So these are very much interlinked. So thank you very much, Marius. And I would like to introduce to you now Courtney. He will talk about his presentation, which will focus on risk communication. Welcome, Courtney.
Thank you, Mark, and appreciate that welcome. And I'm glad to be here joining all of you for this webinar. Thank you for your time. My name is Courtney Price. As Mark said, I'm passionate about communication and really concerned and interested in risk. And as already has been touched upon in the previous presentations, risk communication as a science is a big part of what we do in emergency response. So I'm really pleased to be included in this group and happy to be working with you today and next week. I'm going to be presenting risk communication from the point of 10 plus years working with FAO and partners on public and animal health emergency management, and particularly animal health disease response. So the outline of what I'm going to talk about in this next 20 minutes is threefold. First, I'd like to describe risk communication, or attempt to, talk about what it is, and try to identify some of the best practices related to risk communication. Then we're going to discuss a little bit about how to plan for risk communication, look at what a strategy might look like and what kind of components it might contain. And finally, I'd like to review briefly the points I raised and open it up for questions, as Mark and Marius had said. So, on to trying to describe risk communication. What is it? What do we mean when we talk about risk communication? Well, before we get into that, I think we need to take one small step backwards and talk about what communication itself is, which is already a very complicated and large idea. For our purposes, we'd like to define risk communication as a process that involves two or more people. It's what I said, it's what you heard. It's also an exchange of ideas and exchange of feelings about opinions, facts, new and old information. And it's, if you think about it, really how human beings work on and manage meaning. It's what how we create ideas together, how we reflect on our experiences, and forge new paths together by exchanging and communicating. So, if we're going to put a definition on communication, we could say that it's a process by which people create, sustain, and manage meaning. And that's an important thing to recognize. I think that we all know intuitively and we all work with regularly, but realizing that we're doing this all the time, anytime we're working together, we're communicating anytime we're together as a social species. So, back to the original question, what is risk communication? We could say that if what we just said, communication, is simplistically put, it's conversation, dialogue, exchange, then perhaps risk communication is conversation about risk. In fact, this is the theory I'd like to posit for the rest of my portion of this webinar, and it's something we can build on. So, now that we've discussed communication, how do we discuss risk? What is risk? Well, when we assess it, as many of you will surely be experienced and know through risk analysis and risk assessment, we talk about risk as probability and consequence. Probability being how likely something is going to occur, and consequence, the impact. If it does happen, what's it going to do? And this is a very logical and useful rubric with which to view risk and understand it scientifically. We use it, and it's fundamental for risk assessment. And it's also fundamental for then designing risk management. However, how we perceive risk is a completely indifferent animal. In fact, what you may see as a furry friend, someone else might see as a rabies threat during an outbreak. What we might see as, someone might see as an everyday activity, others might feel is a risky endeavor, dangerous, fraught with problems. Likewise, from farmers to abattoir workers to veterinary technicians to customs agents, we all perceive risk differently, and this risk perception changes with context and time. So, people have worked on this for ages, and one way to think about it that I find useful is to break risk down as far as perception into two parts, as originally proposed by Peter Sandman. These two are hazard and outrage, as he calls them, which hazard being how likely you are, how much harm a risk is likely to cause, and outrage is how upset it makes you feel. Now, this is a nice definition, but it has some difficulties because of the terminology. Hazard is a term used in risk analysis to mean a specific thing, and Sandman's definition muddies the waters. I prefer something a little bit more simplistic. Now, just trying to realize that risk perception is both about knowledge and emotion. Knowledge being what you know about a risk, the probability and consequence, the miniature risk assessment we do every day when we cross the street, trying to see if a lorry is going to be too fast for us to get in front of it or not. The major risk assessment our organization does about FMD in a region. This knowledge is fundamental to our understanding of risk and our perception of risk. However, we also need to take into consideration emotion. How does the risk make us feel when we learn about it? And also, how does it make us feel in the future? What do we project our feelings to be if a risk might occur? We engage in hypothetical emotions, and this is important too. So, in summing up, the main point from this is the human factor is critical. We need to realize that emotion is just as important or even more important than facts when we get to risk perception. So we're getting closer to the way to describe risk communication, and what we can say is that it's definitely about thoughts and feelings. You could use hazard and outrage, or perhaps just simply knowledge and emotion. But it's definitely part of a conversation that involves both emotive and logical or scientific pieces of information. It's important, however, to really put a fine point on what it also is not. And I would argue that risk communication, for our purposes, especially in this workshop, we need to make a line saying it's not about awareness raising or behavior change or getting people to avoid fear or stop panic. These are all things that happen during outbreaks or during preparedness planning, and we need to engage in them. But risk communication at its purest is about the conversation itself. It's about a willingness to engage with someone with a different opinion and different perception and forge a path together, design risk management solutions together. So it's important to point that out, I think. Behavior change is something that, of course, we are striving for, we're hoping for. It's an outcome we may wish for, that our stakeholders take less risky behaviors or engage more with us as veterinary authorities to help be prepared for outbreaks. However, the communication part is really about engagement and discussion, and not about trying to change opinions or behavior directly. In fact, behavioral science can inform risk communication, making it more impactful and useful. But the behavioral science part is definitely a separate approach through nudging or through other behavioral interventions that try to make it easier for people to make, quote unquote, the right decision. The difference is risk communication doesn't assume to know the right decision. It has an opinion or a feeling that it shares, and then the right decision is what the group decides together. So we can say in summary of the first part that risk communication is an interactive exchange of knowledge, opinions, and emotions. It's participatory and non-judgmental, ideally. People need to be open to being wrong, even if we are the authority. And it's also long-term. It's a long-term exercise that involves sharing risk perceptions over time, and it needs to have long-term commitment. So, if we're talking about risk communication, we want to do it well. What characterizes good risk communication? This is a question that I've wrestled with for a long time, and fortunately, several years ago, through a collaboration with FAO, I was able to work on something to better answer this question, even though it's a never-ending piece of work. And that partial answer I call EPIC, which is about sharing risk perceptions for public good. It's an approach to risk communication that summarizes a lot of excellent work from many other thinkers, puts it in a simplistic package that helps us remember what are the best practices. So, according to EPIC, good risk communication is emotive, participatory, imperfect, and continuous. Emotive in that it arouses intense feelings or allows for the sharing of emotion. Participatory in that it's a two-way or more dynamic process involving people inclusively. Imperfect, that it shares uncertainty and is willing to be wrong. This is especially critical during crisis communication, which we will discuss in depth. When an outbreak causes information to change rapidly, and we may say something or do something thinking that we're right, and we may learn that actually we're wrong. The outbreak isn't over, or there's some other extenuating circumstance that changes over time. And we need to be able to share information we have and correct and apologize when we're wrong. And finally, good risk communication should be continuous, never-ending. We're always communicating. Another way to think about it is we're never not communicating. So even when we're silent, even when we're despondent, we want to avoid a critical or scary or hot topic. We're communicating something by being silent. That's important to remember. So good risk communication is EPIC, and it's also strategic. And luckily we have a good frame for those strategies in 5 tasks. The first, precaution advocacy. Second, crisis communication. The third, outrage management. And the fourth, education. Finally, public relations. These first 4 tasks come directly from Peter Sandman, but adapted more to a development context. And the 5th, public relations, is something that I like to stress in building trust and relationships with stakeholders. So let's get into these tasks really quickly. There are rubric or our structure for how we're going to approach stakeholders. First, precaution advocacy. It's about telling people to watch out, and it's probably the one we spend most time in preparedness and pre-crisis phases. We're going to be talking to people who are insufficiently concerned about something we as the authorities believe is very serious, and we're telling them to watch out, essentially. And we do this in many ways. Crisis communication, when there is a crisis, our stakeholders are already very concerned. If they're not, we need to tell them to watch out. But most of the time in a crisis, people already know there's a crisis, and they want to know how to get out of it. And crisis communication is the task in which risk communicators try to share the information that people need in order to get out of a crisis together, to work together to end a crisis. Outrage management is essentially about listening. When people are excessively upset about something that is a small or minor threat, in EU FMD, for example, perhaps there's an outbreak and people with domesticated ruminants or trophy or prize ruminants are really worried about their pet or their very isolated animal being infected when they live far away from the outbreak, for example. Logic says they shouldn't be so concerned because it's really hard for that animal to ever be infected. But they may be very, very angry, upset, concerned, and they need to be listened to. Surprisingly enough, the only way to communicate with them on that side is to listen until they're willing to listen back. And that takes time, and it means mostly patience, and that's what outreach management is about. Education is the sweet spot, as Sandman calls it, or the easy communication. Of course, it's not easy to transfer knowledge. We're attempting to do it in this webinar, and we look forward to learning from you what we could do better next time as well. Education is still a dynamic process, and it's about someone who's interested or somewhat interested in the content, being provided what they want to know by the authority or the teacher, and exchanging through dialogue together. Public relations, finally, is really about building relationships, and something I've seen in my working with FAO and the incredible veterinarians and epidemiologists and crisis managers is that generally, especially in many countries, veterinarians are not understood as a public servant. They come when there's a problem. They're there to. When they come, it's money. It's expensive. But actually, from knowing so many vets, I know that veterinarians are really about helping and providing public service and being a civil servant. So public relations on veterinary science, and especially with EUFMD, preparedness, as Marius said, is all about having a relationship before the crisis happens. And so we're going to talk about that in the workshop too. So what underpins these ideas? Well, whether you're a FAO official talking to transporters on the border of Cameroon, or perhaps you're trying to work with people in Yangon in very difficult slaughtering and market situations, whether you're abattoir workers or small farmers that lose their flock or lose their sheep, or just children involved in animal raising, animal husbandry. We all come at this from a different angle, and as an authority, and as a civil servant and as a public expert trying to work for a public good, we need to be empathetic. We need to care about the context of these individuals. And that's why good risk communication should be empathetic. It's this demonstrated interest in the context of our actors that matters, that enables risk communication to happen. It's got to be supported by actual knowledge on our side of the stakeholders' context, and this can be this could be augmented through anthropology, sociology, economic studies, socioeconomics that allow us to have some insight into who we're dealing with, so we can better communicate with them. Finally, the second part of my communication my presentation is to briefly touch on planning, And we have a simplistic outline of what a communication strategy might contain that helps us get started in planning. And we're going to go through this in the workshop in depth. Our why is the outcome. It's what we hope for. It could be behavior change. It could be attitude shifting. It could be very generic. It could be very specific. But it's the outcome of what we hope our communication will achieve, or at least be part of a solution that changes something. Who are our stakeholders or our audiences? What are the messages we're going to be conversing with them about? We're going to be disseminating in hopes of striking up a conversation. How are our 5 tasks? And where? Where is our communication going to actually take place? Where is it going to appear? This is our products, this is our activities, these are our channels. So briefly to get into those, why is the change you hope to see? And just a few examples of this could be government and stakeholders working together to improve reporting, to stop an outbreak, to enhance preparedness. It could be as specific as also to increase biosecurity along a specific border. It could be based on your risk assessments. But this is something you design a priori that guides your communication. Who? Your audience. And then, like I said, like the slide says, in an ideal world, we know our audience already. And KAP studies can be very useful in developing knowledge about our audience. Spending time with our audience through public relations is really critical. Having risk perception analyses done ahead of time before outbreaks happen can help us engage more effectively. We need to understand and care about our audience, and that's the key takeaway from who. What? Our messages are complex, but they are also complex not just because of the scientific content, but because of the context that they mix with. In fact, this mixing messaging mixer that I have on the slide is an attempt to show a process by which our initial ideas of what we need people to know, think, or do, combined with our understanding of the audience's context, and combined with our risk management actions that we want people to take or that we're going to take, and they finally come out as our finalized messages that we're going to actually disseminate. And we need to test these messages with our audiences as well and adapt them to the feedback we receive. The key ingredient in this mix is, of course, empathy. And the how. Like I said, we have 5 tasks that help guide our actions, and really, I use them as a quick cheat sheet or a quick start towards developing a communication strategy. And it's very useful to use them because they kind of give us clues or quick guides into what we're going to say to whom. And they really are based on the audience's perception of the risk. So they're the context of the audience that guides how we're going to approach them. Where are your products going to appear? We need to know about the audience's media consumption and information habits. How do they get their information? Where do they read or learn or listen to information or news? Or how do they use the media? How much TV do they watch? These kind of pieces of information can be very critical in determining at an outbreak time in our contingency plan. We may know that if an outbreak occurs, we need to do X on this specific communication channel, like television or other. And last but not least, who do your stakeholders trust? Are those people aware of what the veterinary services are trying to do? Do those people work with you regularly? If not, they should. Do we have champions and spokespeople that connect with our stakeholders? Are they part of a community? Are we part of that community? That's very important, and it's going to determine who says what to whom. And the spokespeople are part of our where as well. Finally, just a quick sum up of what we've discussed. Good risk communication is ethic. It's emotional, it's participatory, it's imperfect, allows itself to be wrong, and it's never ending, it's continuous. It's an exchange of ideas where our initial idea and someone else's initial idea mixes up and becomes something new. And it's really about sharing our perceptions of risk in order to try to promote good. It's strategic. It's our who, our why, our what, our how, and our where guide us in creating a strategy that is in part contingency plan and in part a response plan, and communication fits perfectly well into those plans. And our strategy is based on what we know about our audiences and what we know about our risk and what we know about our risk management options. And there's also a slide on some references for further reading, should you wish to get more in depth. The study of risk and the study of perception of risk is a really fascinating and interesting area, and I would highly encourage all of us to discuss more our feelings on this and learn more from each other. I look forward to doing that in this workshop. I thank you for your time, and I'm really excited to be part of this team, and I can't wait to meet you. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Courtney. So a bit of a background story. We have run same workshop with the same topic in 2016 in Budapest, and Courtney was also involved in there. So I'm looking forward to the various exercises that we will be running. And also back in 2016, with the help of Courtney, we started to draft kind of a guideline for FMD risk communication, and we're gonna bring the first draft version in a printed format to the workshop for you to review, and we're gonna then finalize it after this workshop. So to meet with me here is Ruth. She will be also one of the trainers, and similarly as Marius, she will be mostly tasked with response, and her experience is from UK and the various FMD outbreaks.
And well, I will see you next week. Just a couple of things. A few of you, when you were doing the learning, you experienced some problems that the progress wasn't showing. Don't worry about that. You know, the idea of doing the e-learning is that you touch a few of the things we're going to be doing on next week. So it's for your own, good. But it doesn't matter. We're not going to consider, whatever is in the progress. And the other thing, if you have any question or anything you want to discuss during the workshop, you can write in the forum, and we can, we will take these questions and work on that next week.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ruth. So, if you have questions right now, feel free to type them in. This is the section where we're gonna where we have the chat box open, and if you have any particular questions, you're welcome to pose them. If not, there's the forum and there's the workshop also later on. So please, if there's something very particular that you want to discuss, we can. And here again, I would like to thank you for the pre-workshop survey. So we went through it. What are the various wants and needs of the participants? And I'm pretty confident that we will be able to cover what you have requested, and we're doing the latest adjustments to what you have requested. So if there are no questions, we're gonna keep the chat box open, and then just a few more slides on the workshop. So the e-learning page, you know very well. This is where you have found the material before the workshop. It will be there after the workshop. We're gonna put the webinar there and upload it there, and also all the workshop presentations you will be able to find there after the workshop. And here you will also find the practical arrangements. But on those practical arrangements, we already had some participants who were asking us for more details. So I just I ask you for a bit more patience. So we are so all the flights for the participants have been arranged. You have received it. We're gonna go to Kaunas. So we have already organized the transfers between Vilnius and Kaunas from the airport to the hotel. The hotel is called Kaunas Hotel. I think that will be very convenient to remember. That is the picture on the top right. And the training venue will be with the kind collaboration of the Veterinary Academy of Lithuania. Will be at the Lithuanian University of Health and Sciences. And also we're going to organize all the travel back and forth between the training venue. So most of the trainers, we will be there already on Sunday. So we will be meeting you all as you arrive. And as a reminder, we will also have a social event. We will just go for a traditional Lithuanian restaurant enjoy a good evening together. Please be warned that in Kaunas right now, Marius will know better. There will be below 0 temperatures, so please make sure that you bring some warm clothes. But we will not go to the field, so most of the basically the workshop will be only in the academy environment. So we will send you a recap email with all of the information that you need with the finalized draft agenda. So so if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us, and we will send out the recap email to you. So I would like to invite. So thank you very much for Marius, and I would like to thank very much to Courtney and also to you, Ruth. Thank you. So if you have any further questions, please feel free. And you're welcome, Steve. And one more information that I would like to share. The FMD is organizing every 2 years an open session. This is a big event focusing on foot-and-mouth disease policy meeting with science, and this time it will be organized in Italy on the 29th, 30th, 31st of October. So if you're interested, I can give you more information on it, and it is really, one of the biggest events of EFMD is organizing. So thank you very much for participating to this webinar, and then see you all, next week. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Goodbye.